Hello everyone. Today I want to give you a preview of one of the chapters in my soon-to-be published book about my Bigfoot investigations in the state of Oklahoma that has taken place in the past 20 to 25 some odd years. This chapter is about a trip I took down to an area of the state that's in the Ouachita Mountains in southeast Oklahoma, referred to by other Bigfoot research groups as Area X. And I visited that place back in the year 2000, sent several trips down in there. And this is a chapter, a rough draft of the chapter regarding that trip. And I'm going to read it to you, and I hope you enjoy it. In the summer of 2000, I asked a gentleman who lived in the mountains of Leflore County, I asked him, in your opinion, where would be the best place to look for evidence of Bigfoot down here? And this man was a retired forestry worker and knew the surrounding area very well. And without hesitation, he said, Area X. Well, of course, Area X is not the official name of this area. In fact, this was several years before any Bigfoot research group would coin the term. The gentleman used the actual name of the location, but out of respect for the group of researchers that are now actively working this area, I will simply refer to it as they do, and that is Area X. One thing that I can say about this area is it is probably the most remote location in the state of Oklahoma that I've ever been to, and that's saying a lot. The road that led to the trail that I followed into this area back then is no longer accessible. A friend of mine who bear hunts near this location told me recently that now you have to take a different route that is farther to the north, which makes getting there today even more challenging than it was then. So anyway, after being told about this place, I found a local fellow who agreed to lead me to this location, and that's a good thing. Otherwise, I would have had a very hard time finding it. Now, Area X is in a large valley that at that time was only accessible by a combination of county and logging roads. Area X itself was not logged. It is pristine wilderness that spans some 4,000 acres. It's the kind of place that is, unfortunately, getting harder to find as tourism and other development continues to encroach on our ever-shrinking wilderness areas. So I set out early the next morning and followed my guide to the location that the gentleman had said should be a prime location for a Sasquatch to reside. We turned off the main highway onto a dirt road and followed it through several clear cuts that eventually gave way to dense, uncut timber. Like I said, this place was very remote. There was, however, some signs of humanity once we arrived at our destination. Back in the late 1990s, there was all kinds of end-of-the-world type scenarios that were predicted to come to pass as the year 2000 approached. All kinds of cataclysmic dooms were predicted, from the second coming of Christ to the Y2K computer scare. Somehow it was thought that the world's computers just didn't know how to change their dates to the year 2000. As a result, it was predicted that all the world's computers would simply crash, thus sending the world into an apocalyptic chaos that the world had not seen since the Dark Ages. I know, it sounds silly now, but if you're old enough to have lived through this time, you know that a lot of people fell for it. Now we know that when 2000 came around, all the computers simply changed their dates to 2000. But during this scare, some folks had actually gone down into this location, known soon to be as Area X, and built a few off-the-grid cabins tucked away deep in the recesses of this area, just in case the world did come to an end. So when we arrived, I went scouting around to see what I could find. After this initial trip, I would return to this area a total of 4 more times. One of those times would be with one of the researchers that are currently monitoring this area. I searched the creek and surrounding woods for footprints or other evidence of possible Sasquatch habitation. It was late summer and extremely dry, so the prospect of finding viable footprints was highly unlikely. I did find something highly interesting about halfway up a hill on one side of the valley, though. While hiking up the ridge, I came across a well-used game trail and discovered a sapling roughly 3 to 4 inches in diameter that had been twisted around 6 foot off the ground and bent over. This was intriguing. No trees around this sapling showed any other damage. The way in which it was twisted to me would have required something with hands with opposable thumbs having great strength. And this was no dead, brittle tree. This was a healthy, green, living tree that had been twisted around and bent over toward the ground as if to mark something, and it was relatively new. What was it marking? A trail? Territory? Was it a warning for others of its kind to stay away? Was it a warning for me to stay away? Or was it even a Sasquatch that was responsible for the tree damage? I don't know what the significance of this twisted and bent sapling was, but it was there nonetheless, and to me, it was possible evidence that at least one of these creatures may be in the area. On this particular trip, I would only be able to stay for one night. My job limits the time I can actually devote to this quest. My guide was not able to stay the night in the area due to other commitments. One of the cabins was built right up against the side of a hill on one side of the valley. The roof was easily accessible from the side of the ridge, and I decided that it would make a good vantage point to sit and listen and watch the surrounding woods after dark. The equipment I had then was very sparse compared to what I have now, but two items I had were very useful. At that point in time, cell phones as we know them now were still a good ways off. What I had, though, was a bag phone. Basically, it was a square bag with a large battery in it and a phone that was attached to it with a coiled wire. Sounds funny now, but I could call out from any of those remote locations without any problem. You can't do that with today's cell phones. They're just not powerful enough. So anyway, I climbed up on the roof of the cabin right at dark and just sat and listened. The woods were alive with the sounds of crickets, owls, and other things moving around in the timber that I couldn't see. All the typical sounds you would expect to hear at night in the forest. Other than the twisted sapling that I had discovered earlier that day on the game trail, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After sitting on the roof of the cabin for about an hour or so, I was getting a little drowsy. Listening to the crickets and such on a calm summer night tends to have that effect on a person, at least it does for me. I was about to nod off when a small object landed on the tin roof beside me. My first thought was that it was an acorn or a small stick falling from the tree limbs above me. Shortly after that, another object landed on the roof not far from me. This time I turned on my flashlight so that I could hopefully see what it was that had struck the tin beside me. It wasn't an acorn or a stick. It was a small pebble about the size of a nickel. Shortly after that, another small rock landed on the metal roof near me, and then another. I stood up and scanned the tree line around the cabin, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever was tossing the rocks onto the roof, but my flashlight beam would only penetrate the gloom of the forest so far. The woods in southeast Oklahoma are very dense. If you've ever been there, then you can attest to that fact. Even in the daytime, you can't see particularly far into the undergrowth. Add darkness to that, and you can forget about it. A thermal device like a FLIR, a forward-looking infrared, would have been very useful to have at that time. However, I did not. After I shined the light around the perimeter of the cabin for a while and saw nothing, I turned off my flashlight and sat back down. I was so intent on the pebbles that had been thrown onto the roof near me that I completely missed the fact that the woods had gone completely silent. This didn't dawn on me until a few minutes later when I realized the crickets had started chirping again. No more rocks were thrown that night, and I didn't hear the sound of anything I perceived as large moving in the woods around me. Later, though, I did hear a strange throaty whistle from high up on the ridge beside the cabin. It was only one time, and it was not repeated. What made that strange whistle? What threw the pebbles onto the roof while I was sitting up there? I can't know for sure, as I did not see the culprit, but if not a person or a Bigfoot, what could have thrown the rocks? As far as I know, I was the only one down there. Who or what made that strange throaty whistle? Again, I did not see what it was that had made the whistling noise, so I can't be sure. I have, however, heard that same whistle in another area of the Kiamishi Mountains that corresponded with wood knocks and finding footprints of what I believed to have been a Sasquatch the next morning. A few weeks later, I returned to Area X with an associate. While there, we found what appeared to be an old track in the middle of one of the trails that went through the area. It was an older track and showed very little detail, but it was roughly 16 inches long and very humanoid in shape. It did lack sufficient detail for toes and stuff to say for sure what it was. Is it possible that it was the track of a Sasquatch? It could have been. It was certainly in a prime location for an elusive cryptid like Bigfoot to frequent. But the best I can say about the potential track is that it was an interesting maybe due to lack of detail. The evidence that I found in what would later become known as Area X consisted of the small rocks that were thrown onto the tin roof of the cabin that I was sitting on, the strange whistle that I heard that same night, the possible footprint found on a later trip, and the twisted sapling that I found high on the ridge above the area. Over the years, as people have been investigating this, there have been sightings reported from there. One of the more interesting ones was a man who was camping there, got up early and noticed a Sasquatch in the woods staring at him in the early dawn light, and it quickly left the area when it seen that it had noticed him. I myself did not see a Sasquatch when I was down there, but it is certainly a very peculiar place, a very remote place, and I would like to go back there again sometime, does the opportunity arise. Hope you've enjoyed this sneak peek at this chapter of my hopefully soon to be released book, and I'll have several other chapters in there going over different places that I've looked over throughout the state over the years, and hope you'll enjoy it.